Hello and welcome to the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin Drought Assessment webinar for the month of March. My name's Rachel McGuire and I'm with the Auburn University Water Resources Center located in Auburn, Alabama. Today's speakers will be David Zierden of the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University. We'll also have Paul Ankhorn of the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center, Todd Hamill of the National Weather Service Southeast River Forecast Center, Troy Ephraim of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District, and last but not least, Meredith Muth of the NOAA National Integrated Drought Information System. And if you are new to the webinar, I'll let you know we typically hold questions and discussion till all of our speakers have gone. So if you can just hold those questions for later on, or you can also use the question or raise your hand tool on the tool panel for GoToMeeting. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, David Zierden, for our current drought status and our seasonal forecasts and outlooks. The floor is yours, David.
Okay, do you still hear me, Rachel?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Okay, well, you know, I kind of like to start off these webinars with what's currently in the news. So as we go to our first slide, I can't hear because everyone's on mute, but I can feel a collective groan as we see yet another coronavirus map. But I put this up here just to show there's some similarities between the spread of the coronavirus and also the current drought map across the United States. Now, don't get me wrong. There is no connection that has been shown, and I'm not suggesting a connection between drought and the spread of the coronavirus. I just kind of put this out here to lighten the mood a little bit. One thing that the map on the left does point out, though, is the hope that maybe hot and humid weather would slow the spread does not seem to be playing out, as we see hot spots in South Florida, Southern California, around the Houston, Texas area. So that's nothing that I'm going to hang my hat on right now. So with that, we'll go on to the next slide and start talking about a subject we're all far more comfortable with, and that's drought and weather and climate. And before we go into drought, we'll take a look at the current flooded status on the ACF river system. And right now, the crest has moved all the way downstream. What I'm showing is the current gauge stage height at on the Apalachicola River at Bluntstown. And we see that late last week, it finally fell below flood stage and is continuing to fall as rain has eased up in Georgia and Alabama and the middle ACF Basin and headwaters region. So that's good news. The flooding has abated. On the next slide, we will take a look at the current drought status across the ACF Basin. And we see that pretty much the entire ACF Basin, as you would expect, is drought-free with all the heavy rainfall in the last several months and the flooding conditions. But we do see that drought is starting to spread across the Florida Panhandle. The peninsula of Florida is now mostly considered abnormally dry. In fact, spoiler alert for Thursday's drought monitor, we're probably going to see some of those areas in South Florida filling in with the yellow or D0 abnormally dry, and possibly even the introduction of more areas of D1 or moderate drought. So we've had a very warm and dry March here in the state of Florida, and drought conditions are starting to respond. On the next slide, we'll take a closer look at that. This shows accumulated rainfall amounts since March 1st. And we see it's normal to even above normal across middle Georgia, middle Alabama, the Atlanta area with 5 to 6 inches of rainfall, kind of a widespread 4 to 6 inches of rainfall across most of central and northern Alabama and Georgia. But as you get into the southern part of the states and along the Florida state line, those totals dropped to less than 2 inches, only around 1.5 inches. And as we proceed further south down to peninsular Florida only received, for the most part, just a few hundredths of an inch of rainfall in the month of March. So it's been a very dry period, especially in peninsular Florida. On the next slide, to go along with that, we've had unusually warm temperatures in the month of March. This shows the departures from normal for daily average temperature across the tri-state region, and we see across Georgia, Alabama, anywhere from 5 to 9 degrees warmer than normal, 5 to 7 degrees warmer than normal across the state of Florida. So it's kind of been pervasive across the whole southeast United States that we've had unusually warm conditions in the month of March, really hastening the green up and really ramping up evapotranspiration. So on the next slide, we'll start taking a closer look at recent rainfall. And these are the radar estimates of rainfall over the last week or 7 days. And we see a clear line between the haves and the have-nots, central and northern Alabama and Georgia, anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of rainfall, which is pretty much keeping up with average, heavier amounts in northwest Alabama. But then south of that line, we see only a few 100ths or maybe a couple tenths of an inch of rain in South Georgia, South Alabama, and pretty much rain-free across the peninsula of Florida. On the next slide, we'll look a little further back over the last 30 days, and it's really a continuation of the pattern we've seen over the last several months. Heavy rainfall amounts over central Georgia and Alabama, and certainly the northern parts of these states, and the middle and upper ACF basin. Lesser amounts as we get down towards the state line and the Florida Panhandle. And then you also see for South Florida, they're still kind of mostly shaded in blue, which is less than half an inch of rainfall over the last 30 days. On the next slide, we'll look a little further back, and this will show departures from normal over the last 3 months or 90 days. And it really shows you the pattern we've been stuck in. Very copious amounts of rainfall across central and northern Alabama and Georgia, actually below normal, and even some sizable deficits, especially around south of Tallahassee in the Wakulla County area, where deficits are now 8 to 10 inches or more over the last 90 days. And you can see the widespread deficits across the entire state of Florida. So with that in mind, we'll start looking ahead, and we'll look at the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast from the National Weather Service. And it shows pretty much a continuation of that same pattern. Heavy rainfall is forecast for extreme northern Georgia and northern Alabama into Tennessee. But then as we get into the middle and lower ACF basin, very little rainfall is forecast over the next 7 days. On the next slide, we're going to dig a little deeper into the mid-range forecasts than we usually do. And these are a couple experimental products that were shared by Victor Murphy at National Weather Service Southern Region. Over on the left is an experimental quantitative precipitation forecast for week 2, days 8 through 14 from NOAA's Earth Systems Research Lab. And it shows the likelihood of pretty widespread rainfall across the entire southeast or even eastern United States. So that's potentially some good news. Over on the right is the European model ensemble forecast for rainfall anomalies over the next 46 days, or roughly a month and a half. And it's more dialed in on showing a continuation of the pattern of heavy rainfall across northern Alabama, northern Georgia, and Tennessee, but much lesser amounts in the middle and lower ACF basin in the state of Florida. Again, these are experimental products, and we really lose predictability after that 10-day to 14-day time frame. So these are to be taken kind of as guidance or maybe a heads up, but not necessarily a concrete forecast. On the next slide, we'll take a look at some of the official Climate Prediction Center products for the same time period. Over on the left is their week 2 precipitation forecast, and it does show some consistency in indicating above normal rainfall is favored over the tri-state area and the ACF Basin and the state of Florida. And their experimental week 3 and 4 forecast over on the right even shows a continuation of that pattern. So all these are pretty much agreeing and showing that hopefully after the next 7 days we'll see a pattern shift to a wetter pattern. But again, this is a spring transition period, and forecasting is, especially this far out, is very difficult at this time of year. On the next slide, we'll start taking a look at the Pacific Ocean and further down the road, and it appears that area of warm anomalies in the central and western Pacific seems to be expanding, or at least holding its own. We still don't see a well-defined El Nino signature over in the eastern Pacific, where you have varied anomalies between some warm, some cool, but certainly stronger anomalies over in the western and central Pacific. And if we look at the Nino 3.4 index, we'll still consider this neutral conditions, but it is creeping back above that half-degree threshold over the last couple weeks. On the next slide, we'll take a look at the official forecast, and the latest probabilistic forecast from the Climate Prediction Center and IRI still shows heavily favoring neutral conditions through the February, March, April time period, and all the way through the summer, the August, September, October, neutral is still favored. So the official forecast is not predicting any rapid transition to La Nina. Over on the right-hand side are the various model forecasts for the next 10 to 12 months. And what we see is a pretty good spread, some warmer than normal throughout that time period, others a little cooler than normal. Then we have 3 models that are kind of off the rails in predicting a rapid transition to La Nina conditions or colder than normal ocean temperatures. But again, these models could very well be outliers, and this is a very difficult time to predict these kind of transitions in the Pacific Ocean. So again, wait and see is probably a much better strategy than putting too much stock in any of these predictions of us transition to La Nina conditions. So with that in mind, we'll take a look at the seasonal outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center. Over on the left is the temperature outlook, which is pretty consistently favors above normal temperatures through the next 3 months, April through June. Over on the right is the precipitation forecast, and it's actually good news. It still favors above normal precipitation across much of the eastern United States, including the ACF Basin. So that's certainly good news and certainly for the state of Florida, where we have been through a very dry period in the last 3 weeks. The last slide I have is going to be the seasonal drought outlook. And as the summer rainy season for peninsular Florida usually does not begin until late May or sometimes early June. So with the continuation of the dry season and with current conditions, additional drought development is likely across much of the state of Florida. But further north in the ACF Basin, we're not in drought conditions, and they do not anticipate drought conditions to develop. So we'll go ahead and summarize on the final slide. The Apalachicola and Flint rivers have fallen below flood stage now. Severe and moderate drought continues south of Tallahassee and Wakulla, Leon, and Jefferson counties, and abnormally dry conditions are spreading across all of the Florida peninsula. March temperatures are running 5 degrees above normal across the entire southeast. Our rainfall monitoring at both weekly, 30-day, and 90-day shows extensive rainfall over the upper and middle ACF basin, but below normal over the lower basin and the Florida coast. The 7-day forecast, possibility of locally heavy rain in the headwaters region, but continued dry conditions in the middle and lower ACF. Week 2 and longer outlooks are starting to favor a wetter pattern for the southeast, and they're all pretty consistent in doing so. Neutral conditions remain in the Pacific Ocean and are forecast to continue through the summer. Any forecast for a summer transition is still highly uncertain at this time. And the CPC seasonal forecast favors higher chances for warm temperatures and also above normal rainfall across the southern and eastern United States. And drought is likely to develop further over portions of Florida. The ACF, though, is likely to remain drought-free in the next month or so.
Thank you for that update, David. And now I'd like to turn it over to Paul Inghorn of USGS to update us on our current streamflow and groundwater conditions in the ACF.
Hello, Rachel.
I hear you loud and clear, Paul.
Awesome, great. Good afternoon, everybody. So we'll begin by looking at the current real-time stream flows across the southeast there. So you see the current graphic on the right there. So much of north and northwest Georgia saw a lot of rain last night, and then streams have responded accordingly. So we're seeing a lot of much above normal flows for most of the headwaters of the ACF Basin and northwest Georgia. And then as we move downstream and across further south through Georgia and Florida, stream flows are ranking in the normal range. A few stations are currently showing much below normal along the ACF there, but that's likely dam and regulation patterns that we're seeing. And then, of course, that area south of Tallahassee, which has been prone to an absence of rainfall, and we're seeing very low conditions in that area too. Also, I just want to point out east and North Carolina, there's a huge disparity between below normal flows there, and then as you move west in North Carolina, you see normal. A few days ago, pretty much the whole state was currently ranked as much below normal. So the rains from the past 24, 48 hours have helped lessen the deficit in stream flow up there. Anyway, just move on to the next slide. We'll look at the below normal 7-day average, and a current map is the lower map there, and currently across the ACF there are no stations that are ranking below normal 7-day average, and that's pretty much a continuation of what we saw from our last webinar. You will see that areas of Florida, the Panhandle, and some of southern Alabama are starting to rank in the below normal flow conditions there. All right, next slide. We'll start looking at 28-day average flows. So the black line there is the previous 28-day average stream flow. So this is designed to show more of a trend. And then all of historic 28-day average flows for each day are accordingly ranked and color-coded. So we'll start with our most upstream site there, Chattahoochee River, Cornelia. We just came off a new record high flow, and flows have declined now down right around the 70th percentile. So we've just moved into a normal 28-day average flow for that station. Same story to Chestatee. With all that heavy rain that we saw in North Georgia, we set a new historic high flow there for the 28-day average, and over the past 4 weeks, it steadily declined, and right now we're about the 75th percentile, just crossing over into normal conditions. So we begin the downward trend as we start to approach the drying season through summer. So further, next slide, we'll move further downstream. These stations are below Lake Lanier. So currently, Apalachicola or Chattahoochee River at Atlanta is setting a new high 28-day average flow. And then Whitesburg is just coming off that peak and is moving down towards the 95th percentile. So we've seen some pretty high flows there in the past 4 weeks at those two stations. The next slide. We'll move down further to West Point and Columbus, and same story there. High flows in the past 4 to 6 weeks, where we set new historic 28-day average flows. West Point is currently at the 95th percentile, as well as Columbus. All right, our next slide, we'll switch over to the Flint River. And so these two stations, Griffin and Carsonville, coming off a peak, again, from the heavy rains we've had in the past month or so. And so currently they're both ranked at much below, or I'm sorry, much above normal. We're looking at September there. Not long ago. But anyway, we'll look at the next slide. And we'll move further downstream to Albany and Bainbridge. So Albany is currently ranking much above normal, as well as Bainbridge, just peaking there. And then the next slide will be the Apalachicola River at Chattahoochee, and conditions there are currently ranking much above normal. All right, next slide we'll look at groundwater conditions across the ACF. And our current brief on the right there shows majority of the groundwater wells are currently ranking in the normal range. But we have 1 well, 2 wells that are ranking much below, and then we have other wells which are much above normal and even high. So we're looking at mixed conditions in groundwater levels. We'll hone in on our 2 reference sites that are circled there. On our next slide, we'll look at the conditions in Miller County, and so currently we are in the normal range for groundwater elevation. And our next slide will be Doherty County, and we actually moved out of much above normal and currently now in the above normal ranking for groundwater elevation. So plenty of recharge there and groundwater conditions at those 2 wells. All right, next and last slide, we'll just wrap up with a summary. So as we saw, real-time stream flows for the ACF Basin currently ranked from high to much below normal. No portions of the ACF Basin currently ranked as below normal for the 7-day average stream flow. 28-day average stream flow for the Chattahoochee River is currently much above normal, with a new extreme recorded at Chattahoochee at Atlanta. And then the 28-day average stream flow for Flint River currently much above normal to above normal. And then finally, real-time groundwater levels across the ACF Basin range from high to much below normal. However, majority of the stations are currently ranked in normal range. That concludes it, Rachel. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. Now I'd like to turn it over to Todd Hamill of the Southeast River Forecast Center for our Streamflow forecast for the ACF. The floor is yours, Todd.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And we've obviously it's been a very busy winter, and as we go, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. But as we have been talking about all the kind of the changes that are going on right now, for our April 1st through May 1st timeframe, we're looking at what looks to be normal stream flow forecasts. One of the things that's happened over the last couple of weeks is the last 14 days, the top of the basin has been near normal in rainfall, and as you get to the middle and the bottom, we've been a little bit below normal. And there's also the issue that I think that we've had a green up of the southeast. So our foliage and everything else is coming in probably about 2 weeks earlier than usual, and because of that, we're getting more competition for that water in this area. So it's helped to dry things up just a little bit from the extremely wet conditions we've had, and so the recent rainfalls we're starting to see, what we're seeing over yesterday and today, aren't having quite the same impact they would have had a month ago. And so that's, as we go forward and we look, right now it looks like, based on what we're seeing, and remember that these aren't based on the future rainfall forecast. These are based on where our current soil moisture conditions are right now and what we're doing and what we have going forward from a climatology point of view. Our April 1st to May 1st timeframe typically is a little drier. We're in a transition from our winter/spring type rainfall into what we'll get into when we get into May and June, where we start getting into the more convective season. So April looks to be more normal as opposed to what we've seen over the last few months, which has been above normal. So that's what we're expecting, at least for the April timeframe. And if we go to the next slide to talk about the 3 months, it looks very similar. Now, right now we're just wet enough and everything else that we could very easily tip to the wet side. It wouldn't take too much if we got into a pattern again of very wet weather, we could tip into that wet very quickly. So we could have gone either way with that, but right now it looks, again, very similar to that we're looking at normal type stream flows and for the April 1st through July 1st timeframe. So we're going into the summer from a drought perspective, and this will probably be addressed by Troy in just a moment, about our reservoir levels and everything else are in decent shape to going into the summer, and that we're having to be very careful about how much water we have as opposed to too little. Right now, from a stream flow point of view, especially on the Chattahoochee, we've got plenty of water to work with, and normal rainfall, or even just a little bit below normal rainfall, our stream flows should stay in pretty good shape. The one area, as we look into the Flint River, which is mostly uncontrolled, it doesn't have a reservoir at the top of it, it looks to be normal during this time of year too. And just as we get into the middle to the bottom of the basin, that's where, we've had a little bit less rain at the very bottom of the basin, but we've had enough rain at the top to keep things wet and keep things moving through. So again, it looks like we'll be in the normal range. But right now, just because we're just coming out of that above normal kind of regime and pattern, that we could very quickly go to that above normal if we start to see more rainfall. But right now, we're not seeing that. It looks to be a normal type forecast. So we'll go to the next slide and just kind of an overview, and I've kind of gone over most of that, is that really we're looking at near normal for this time. And again, it's a borderline between near normal and above normal. So if we get into a very wet pattern, it could tip us into that above normal. But right now, just based on what we're seeing and what we're looking forward to, it looks like a near normal forecast for that time period.
Okay, thank you very much, Todd.
Right.
And now we'll move on. Sorry, somebody speaking?
Hey, Rachel, this is Cindy. I just wanted to do a mic test, actually, to make sure that you could hear us.
Great timing.
Right, we just cannot access the webinar link.
Okay.
It's a security thing, but we can access
so you can't
the audio.
see the slides.
And I think Troy, right, we can't see the presentation, but I believe Troy's on the line with the information, so he'll go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so then we'll start with Troy Ephraim of the Mobile District for the Army Corps of Engineers on our current ACF reservoir conditions.
Okay, can you hear me, Rachel?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. All right, so we can start with Lake Lanier. And our midnight pool elevation was 1072.3. And our 10-day forecast is 1072.47. and we're kind of hovering around that. Beginning, I think April 15th, we'll begin our refill to where our summer pool level will be 1071. And so with the rain that we're getting right now, we may see a slight bump in the pool over the next couple of days, but we should be able to transition down to the guide curve relatively easily. Next slide for West Point. At West Point, the midnight pool elevation was 631.07, and our 10-day forecast 633.04. And we're kind of following the trend of guide curve with our summer refill. We should be right on track to get to the 635 summer pool elevation. All right, next slide for Walter F. George. Our midnight pool elevation was 188.67, and our 10-day forecast 188.72. And that's kind of following the same trend. May 1 begins our summer refill for type of conservation for the summer of 190. And with what we got, as Todd was saying, with the pretty normal stream flow conditions, we should be right on track to be able to meet that 190. All right, next slide for Jim Woodruff in Lake Seminole. The midnight pool elevation was 77.56, and our 10-day forecast 77.32. And we were, over the past about month and a half, we've seen discharge down there get up to about 150,000, which was a lot. I wish I could have gone down there to see it, but they're just sending kind of what they're getting from the Chattahoochee and the Flint. Next slide for the Basin conservation and flood storage. We've been in zone 1, and we're projected to stay there with what we got for at least the next 5 weeks. Okay, last slide for the summary. As Todd had mentioned before, we're kind of been in that above normal for the ACF basin. Lake Lanier, West Point, and George are all operating above guide curve, and we expect them to approach or stay near guide curve over the next 5 weeks as we begin our summer refill time. And for the composite conservation storage, we are in zone 1 currently, and we project to stay there over the next 5 weeks.
All right, thank you very much for that reservoir update, Troy. And now I want to turn it over to Meredith Muth of the NOAA National Integrated Drought Information System to give us some updates on some would have been upcoming events.
Well, we still have a few, just some small cancellations I wanted to make sure, and some scheduling changes that are happening. Number one, the ACF Water Conference that was scheduled for April has been canceled. At this time, there is no plan to continue to reschedule that. Next, or I also wanted to highlight that the ACF Drought Dashboard listening sessions are going to continue. Again, this is a new effort to focus initially on the ACF River Basin with some applications to the broader states of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida to help collate and inform drought information sharing, understanding, and decision making across the basin. We had our first in-person listening session that took place in East Point, Florida, at Apalachicola Bay just a few weeks ago, and it was great. We had a very diverse group of stakeholders attend, including one of our speakers, David Zierden. Thank you for joining us. Because of the current conditions, we are going to move forward with the listening sessions, but instead we are moving to a virtual format. And instead of long, full days of a virtual meeting, we've decided to narrow these down to 2-hour sessions and focus on that information we'd really like to most have from you and your partners in the region. So this will be an interactive Zoom discussion to solicit input towards informing these drought dashboards. There are 4 scheduled, again, 2-hour sessions. You only need to sign up for 1. There are links here, and you will also be shared those links in a separate email. So please, if you did not attend the East Point session, please sign up for one of these 4 sessions. We are limiting each one to 4 people. If you have additional questions, you can contact Kristen Rouse, and her email is there. Next. Oh, actually, before I move forward, one of the things that came out of that ACF Drought Dashboard listening session was we asked participants to identify where they go to for drought information and where they access that information, how it's shared, and what was the most common source of information for many in the room was these ACF monthly webinars on drought assessment. And so most of the people acknowledge that they don't actually call in, but they look for the email, they look for the great synthesis that Rachel puts together, or it is shared with them by other people. So I just want to emphasize that these webinars are reaching a much broader group of people in the region, not just those who are calling into the webinar. So this information is proving useful, and everyone found it incredibly valuable. So next. And there are just 2 upcoming NIDIS related activities related to drought early warning in the Southeast area. We did start a Southeast Climate webinar series. This is led by the Southeast Regional Climate Center. It does talk about more than just drought. For example, we spoke heavily on flooding, and we had some great participation from the Southeast River Forecast Center last time. We'll also be doing some state spotlights. So you're welcome to join. The next one is Tuesday, April 14th, and that link to sign up will be included in the next ACF monthly reminder for webinars. And also, please keep an eye out for a survey to solicit some input and feedback on developing a Southeast Regional Drought Early Warning System. So this would take the great experiences that we've learned from the ACF as well as the Coastal Carolinas and scale that up to include the broader geographic footprints of at least all of the 5 states currently circled and potentially more. So please take a few minutes and fill out that survey when it hits your inbox. And I think that's it. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thanks, Meredith. And I'd like to thank our speakers one more time, David Zierden, Paul Ankhorn, Todd Hamill, Troy Ephraim, and Meredith Muth for contributing today. Also, we had some additional information sent by Victor Murphy. Thank you for that. And I'd like to open up the floor for any questions, comments, or discussion that our attendees may have for any of our speakers. You can also use the question box on the tool panel if you'd rather not try to unmute yourself. So I'll give just a few seconds for anybody who has burning questions.
This is Tom. I guess I didn't see the Alabama map, but we are continuing to monitor conditions and discussing when conditions may merit that we restart our monitoring and impact group webinars. You know, we clearly are not in any kind of serious drought conditions. I have not heard from John Christie. Maybe some of y'all have during this period, so I'm not quite sure if they're up and running. I haven't seen his inputs into the national monitor. But anyway, we do have some drought creeping into the southwestern portion of the state. We're continuing to monitor that, and as of now, there's no real reported impacts associated with it.
All right, thanks for that info, Tom. Did anyone have anything else to add or any other questions for our speakers? All right, well, if we don't have any questions, I want to make sure everybody knows there's been a slight change in the schedule for our next webinar. It will be Tuesday, April 21st, so the 3rd Tuesday of April. This was originally to not conflict with the ACF Waters Conference, ironically enough, but we're going to hold that date because we changed registration. So mark that in your calendars. Registration links will be going around. I will have a follow-up email with a summary report of this briefing. And if you have any questions or comments or need to be added to the webinar reminder and updates list, please let me know. My contact information's on the slide. Thank you to everyone for attending, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.